China ends up being the leader of the socialist and progressive world. It's willy-nilly. Whether you want the role or not, it is thrust upon you. You're the focus of the imperialist onslaught. You're the main target for the US's attempt to re-establish its hegemony over the world. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, comrades, friends. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been asked to speak a bit about geopolitical changes on the African continent. It's a huge topic, but I'll try and break it down a bit. So, core message is that Africa, based on its history, based on current trends, and the way geopolitics, global politics is shaping up, really has two possible futures. One, there's a Pan-Africanist future that allows us to participate in global affairs as a single large continent in a multipolar framework with all the other major blocs and countries of the world. The other possibility for Africa is that we are recolonized. Our old colonial masters in Europe and their new colonial master, the United States, have every intention to resume direct control of our affairs in a way they have not had since the 60s and 70s. Why does this matter? We live in times of conflict. There's a low-key global war underway between the progressive socialist forces of the world that want to establish a new alternative for organizing society. On the other hand, we have the forces of imperialism led by the United States, which seek to destroy any possibility of an alternative. By the sheer facts of history and the logic of struggle, China ends up being the leader of the socialist and progressive world. It's willy-nilly. Whether you want the role or not, it is thrust upon you. You're the focus of the imperialist onslaught. You're the main target for the US's attempt to re-establish its hegemony over the world. It's a Cold War now, but it could very quickly become a very hot war. The nature of war allows for many accidents and unpredictable consequences. So things could change, even just as a result of the irresponsible statements. For example, in the last few weeks, a number of US generals have been making the predictions that war between the United States and China is possible within the next 24 months. That kind of statement raises tensions and creates facts on the ground, whether we like it or not. However, is that for us, for the forces that represent civilization, the forces that want humanity to continue to develop and grow, the outcome we need, the best outcome for us, is prevent conflict from heating up. In other words, to win the confrontation without the enemy firing a single shot. That's the best outcome for us, because clearly time is on our side. So we must be working to win the war by mobilizing society. That kind of deterrence requires alliances. It requires that China, Africa, Latin America, the rest of Asia, that we strengthen our alliances around things that we value, around cooperation, and make it clear to our opponents, imperialism, that they cannot prevail, they cannot frighten us into submission. I'm not saying that we don't also prepare for the alternative. We must prepare. the forces we fight against are crazy enough to do something silly. And we must learn to encircle imperialism and to establish the authority of the new world that is possible. So, needless to say that in this coming and existent confrontation, the socialist forces in Africa stand staunchly with China. We are absolutely clear that in this context, whatever other issues there are, China represents the survival of the human race and the growth of civilization. So, a large part of the reason that we are here is to communicate this and to try and turn the objective strategic alliance into a friendship, to get to know you, to allow you to know us, and to know the various forces that we represent, so that we can learn to work together better to save our planet. So Africa, why is Africa important? By 2050, the projections are that Africa will have a population of 2.5 billion people by 2050. That's less than 30 years from now. Also by 2050, Africa will have a GDP of between 16 and maybe 20 trillion US dollars, compared to China, which will have 58 trillion, and the US, which by then will only have 25 trillion on the current course of economic development. Africa also has 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Now, in the context of the kind of nutrition crisis that the world faces, this is a hugely significant fact. 60% of uncultivated arable land is in Africa. Africa also has 40% of the world's gold, 90% of all the chromium and platinum. We have the world's largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, uranium, nickel, silver, and several other strategic and precious minerals. Africa also has, significantly in the context of the current and evolving conflict, 54 seats out of 198 in the United Nations Organization. Africa represents a quarter of the votes in the UN. Africa represents a very important bloc. I'm not suggesting that Africa has a monolithic vote, but the way Africans think about the rest of the world is important for how the world's various contexts and cooperation evolve. So, simply put, Africa's resources are critical for the development of humanity. But they are also critical for the logistics of conflicts. Either way, who Africa makes friends with, who Africa supports, who Africa is in solidarity with, is an important issue for the future of the world. Now, it is in this context that two trends are emerging around African geopolitics. This is vastly oversimplified, I know, but just to get the point across. So China is reaching out in solidarity, in friendship, in trade. It is developing infrastructure. It is financing projects. It is engaged in collaboration. It is engaged in cultural exchanges, education, etc., with Africa. Across the length and breadth of the continent, China is establishing mutually beneficial and science-based relations with Africans. And that is good. I'm not saying that China doesn't seek to get the best deal it can on specific transactions and so on. Trade is trade. We're all horse thieves when it comes down to it. But trade is very different from colonial acquisitions and domination. Now, on the other hand, imperialism's, and particularly the US and Europe's response to the fact of Africa's potential wealth is very different. That seeks to dominate and to control Africa's future. And this is partly an objective in itself, to access these resources for the benefit of American capital, American transnational corporations, and so on. So this is the context in which African geopolitics is changing.